The summer heat of 1878 pressed down on Taylor, Texas like a heavy hand, and Tessa Grant stood on the makeshift platform in the town square knowing her life was about to change forever, though she could never have imagined how much. The auctioneer, a portly man with sweat stains spreading across his shirt, cleared his throat and addressed the small crowd that had gathered. Most were there out of morbid curiosity rather than genuine interest in purchasing a human being, even if the law technically called it an indentured contract to satisfy debts. Tessa kept her chin raised despite the burning humiliation that threatened to buckle her knees. She would not give these people the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving behind a ranch he had mortgaged 3 times over and debts that stretched from Taylor to San Antonio. The bank had been patient at first, but patience wore thin when money was involved. When they came to collect and found nothing of value except the land itself and a 20-year-old woman with no means of payment, they had presented her with 2 choices: debtor's prison or indenture. At least with indenture, she would be housed and fed, they had said, as if that made the situation any less degrading. The auctioneer began his pitch, describing her as if she were livestock. Healthy young woman can cook, clean, knows her way around a ranch. Starting bid is $200 to cover the debts of the Grant estate. Tessa scanned the crowd, recognizing most faces. There was Mr. Hemsworth, who owned the general store and had always looked at her too long. There was Wade Carson, whose ranch bordered what used to be her family's land. Several other ranchers and businessmen stood scattered among the onlookers, some appearing interested, others just watching the spectacle unfold. Then her eyes landed on a man she had never seen before, standing at the back of the crowd. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of hard work. He wore a black hat pulled low, but she could see dark hair curling slightly at his collar and a strong jaw covered with a few days' worth of stubble. Unlike everyone else who seemed to be watching her with various degrees of pity or calculation, he was watching the auctioneer with an intensity that made the muscles in his jaw work. $200, Wade Carson called out, and Tessa's stomach turned. She knew what kind of man Wade was, had heard the stories about how he treated his ranch hands, had seen the bruises on the face of his last housekeeper before she disappeared. 200, we have 200, the auctioneer called. Do I hear 250? 250, Mr. Hemsworth offered, and Tessa was not sure if that was better or worse. The bidding continued slowly, climbing in small increments. Each number felt like another nail in the coffin of her dignity. The amount reached $375, with Wade Carson being the last to bid. The auctioneer prepared to call it final when a voice rang out from the back. $800. Every head in the crowd turned. The stranger had spoken, his voice deep and carrying a tone that suggested he was not a man accustomed to being questioned. He stepped forward through the parting crowd, and Tessa could see him more clearly now. He had striking blue eyes that met hers for just a moment before returning to the auctioneer. There was something in that brief glance, something that was not cruel or calculating. It almost looked like anger but not directed at her. 800, the auctioneer stammered. Sir, the debts only amount to $400 when you include all the fees and interest. 800, the man repeated firmly. Do I hear any other bids? The crowd murmured in confusion and speculation. Wade Carson looked like he might counter, but $800 was more than twice what anyone had expected to pay. It was an absurd amount for an indenture contract. Carson's face reddened with anger, but he remained silent. Going once, going twice, sold to the gentleman for $800, the auctioneer declared quickly, as if afraid the stranger might change his mind. The stranger approached the platform and reached up to help Tessa down. His hand was calloused and warm, his grip steady but not forceful. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 26 or 27, his face weathered by sun and wind but handsome in a rugged way. There was a scar above his left eyebrow that gave him a dangerous look, though his eyes remained kind. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure what else to say to the man who now owned her contract. He did not respond, simply guided her toward where the auctioneer was preparing the papers. The transaction took longer than expected because the auctioneer kept questioning the amount, insisting it was more than necessary. But the stranger, whose name she learned was Blake Thornton, insisted on 800 and would not hear otherwise. Finally, the papers were signed, money exchanged, and the auctioneer handed Blake the contract that bound Tessa to him for a period of 5 years, or until the debt was considered worked off, whichever came first. Blake took the papers, glanced at them once, then deliberately and methodically tore them in half. The auctioneer gasped. "Sir, what are you doing? That is a legal contract." Blake tore the papers again into smaller pieces. "I paid double what the debts required. The extra money goes to Miss Grant as payment for the distress this town has caused her. The contract is void. She owes nothing to anyone." Tessa felt her knees actually buckle this time, and Blake caught her arm to steady her. "I do not understand," she managed to say. "You are free to go wherever you wish," Blake said, his voice gentler now as he addressed her directly. "The money I paid clears all debts and leaves $400 to your name. You owe me nothing, and you owe this town nothing." The crowd erupted in confused conversation. The auctioneer sputtered about legalities and proper procedures, but Blake ignored him entirely. His attention focused on Tessa, who was staring at him as if he had sprouted wings. "Why would you do this?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. "You do not even know me." Blake's jaw tightened again in that way she had noticed before. Because what was happening here was wrong. Because no person should be sold like property to satisfy debts they did not create. Because I have money and you needed help, and that seemed reason enough. Tears finally escaped Tessa's control, sliding down her cheeks despite her best efforts. "I have nowhere to go. The ranch is gone. I have no family, no prospects." For the first time, Blake seemed uncertain, as if he had not thought past the moment of tearing up the contract. He glanced around at the dispersing crowd, many of whom were still watching them with open curiosity, then back at Tessa. "I own a ranch about 15 miles west of here," he said slowly. "I could use help with cooking and managing the house. The work is honest, the pay is fair, and you would have your own room. But it would be your choice, and you could leave whenever you wanted." Tessa studied his face, trying to read any hidden motives, any signs of deception. All she saw was genuine concern and a hint of awkwardness, as if he was not accustomed to making such offers. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Blake removed his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair. "I lost my mother when I was 16. She was a widow trying to hold onto a small piece of land that my father left her. When she could not pay the mortgage, she was offered a similar choice to what you face today. She chose debtor's prison, thinking it was more honorable. She died there 3 months later of fever. So maybe I am being kind to you, or maybe I am trying to make up for not being old enough or strong enough to save her. Either way, the offer stands." The honesty in his words struck Tessa deeply. She wiped at her tears and straightened her shoulders. "I accept your offer, Mr. Thornton. And I promise you will not regret giving me a chance." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first she had seen from him. "Call me Blake. Mr. Thornton was my father, and we did not get along well enough for me to want his title." He gestured toward a horse hitched nearby, a beautiful chestnut mare with white stockings. That is Copper. She is gentle enough to ride double until we get to my place. I have a wagon there we can bring back for your things, assuming you have belongings you want to collect. Everything I own fits in 2 trunks at the boarding house, Tessa admitted. Mrs. Patterson has been kind enough to let me stay there since the bank took the ranch, but I have not been able to pay her in weeks. We will settle your account with her and collect your trunks, Blake decided, offering his hand to help her mount. Ready. Tessa had never ridden double with a man before, and she felt acutely aware of how close she had to sit behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. He sat tall in the saddle, his body warm and solid against her. She tried not to think about the impropriety of it all and instead focused on the fact that, for the first time in months, she felt something that might have been hope, the ride to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house was short, and Blake helped her dismount with the same gentle courtesy he had shown at the auction. Inside, Mrs. Patterson, a plump woman with kind eyes and graying hair, gasped when she saw Tessa. "Oh, child, I heard what happened in the square. Are you all right?" She glanced at Blake with open suspicion. "And who is this?" "This is Blake Thornton, Mrs. Patterson. He paid my debts and tore up the contract. I am going to work at his ranch as a free employee." Saying the words out loud made them feel more real, and Tessa felt a surge of gratitude so strong it nearly overwhelmed her again. Mrs. Patterson's expression shifted from suspicion to surprise to grudging approval as she looked Blake over more carefully. "That was a decent thing you did, young man." Indecent what they were trying to do to this girl in the first place, if you ask me. Her father was a good man who just had bad luck. "Yes, madam," Blake agreed. "I would like to settle Miss Grant's account with you and collect her belongings." Mrs. Patterson waved a hand dismissively. "She does not owe me anything. She helped around here when she could, and that was payment enough." But Blake insisted, and eventually they agreed on a sum that covered the room and board with a little extra for the woman's kindness. Tessa's 2 trunks were indeed small, containing clothes, a few books that had been her mother's, and little else of monetary value but everything of sentimental worth. Blake carried both trunks as if they weighed nothing, loading them onto Copper's back with practiced efficiency. "It is a long ride," he warned Tessa. "We will go slow, but it will be sunset before we arrive. Are you comfortable with that?" Tessa nodded. After everything that had happened today, a long ride seemed like the least of her concerns. They set off, leaving Taylor behind them, and with each mile, Tessa felt the weight on her chest lighten slightly. Blake did not talk much as they rode, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Tessa found herself studying him when she thought he would not notice, trying to understand this man who had appeared out of nowhere and changed her fate. His hands on the reins were sure and experienced, his posture relaxed, but alert. Every so often his eyes would scan the horizon, a habit born from years of watching for danger. "How long have you had your ranch?" Tessa finally asked, needing to fill the silence with something other than her own racing thoughts. 5 years, Blake replied. "I worked as a ranch hand and cowboy from the time I was 16, saved every penny I could. When a piece of land came available, I bought it and built everything from the ground up. It is not fancy, but it is mine and it is paid for." "That must have taken incredible discipline," Tessa said, impressed despite herself. Blake shrugged. "I did not have much choice. After my mother died, I had nothing and no one. I decided then that I would never be in a position where I could not help someone who needed it, where I could not stand up against injustice. Money provides that ability, so I focused on earning it honestly." "Is that why you paid so much today?" "To make sure no one could question your right to tear up the contract." Partly, Blake admitted. Also because I wanted to make sure you had money of your own. $400 is enough to start fresh somewhere if you decide my ranch is not where you want to be. Tessa absorbed this information quietly. Everything Blake did seemed calculated to give her choices, to restore the autonomy that had been stripped from her. It was such a foreign concept after months of feeling powerless that she hardly knew how to process it. The landscape gradually changed as they traveled west, the scattered buildings of Taylor giving way to open rangeland dotted with mesquite trees and scrub brush. The sun beat down mercilessly, and Tessa was grateful for the bonnet that shaded her face. Blake stopped once to let Copper drink from a creek and to offer Tessa water from his canteen. "It is beautiful out here," Tessa said, looking around at the endless sky and rolling terrain. "Wild and lonely, but beautiful." "That is why I love it," Blake said. After years of taking orders and living in crowded bunkhouses, having space to breathe felt like the greatest luxury imaginable. As they continued riding, Blake pointed out landmarks that would help Tessa find her way to town and back when she needed. He showed her where the water sources were, which areas to avoid because of rocky ground that could injure a horse, and where the property lines of his ranch began. "I have about 2,000 acres, he explained. "It is not the biggest spread in Texas, but it is enough to run a decent herd of cattle and some horses. I have 4 ranch hands who help with the heavy work. They are good men, respectful and hardworking. They have a bunkhouse on the south side of the property." "Do you live alone in the main house?" Tessa asked, then blushed, realizing how forward the question might sound. If Blake noticed her embarrassment, he did not show it. "Yes. I built it larger than I needed, thinking someday I might have a family, but that has not happened yet. For now, it is just me and a lot of empty rooms." The sun was indeed setting by the time they crested a small rise, and Blake pointed to a valley below. "There. That is home." Tessa looked down at the ranch spread out before them and felt her breath catch. Blake had undersold it significantly. The main house was a solid structure built from local stone and timber, with a wide porch that wrapped around at least 2 sides. It was not a mansion by any means, but it was substantial and well built, with glass windows that caught the dying light and a stone chimney rising from the center. Nearby stood a large barn, several smaller outbuildings, and in the distance, the bunkhouse Blake had mentioned. Corrals held horses, and she could see cattle grazing in the farther pastures. "You built all this yourself?" she asked in amazement. "With help," Blake corrected. "I am a decent carpenter and stonemason, but I am not a miracle worker. The men who work for me now helped construct most of it in exchange for shares in the first cattle sales. It was a risk for all of us, but it paid off." They rode down into the valley as the last light faded from the sky. A few ranch hands emerged from the bunkhouse, clearly curious about who Blake was bringing home. He introduced her simply as Miss Grant, who would be helping with the house, and the men tipped their hats respectfully before returning to their own business. Inside, the house was as impressive as the outside. The main room featured a large stone fireplace, comfortable furniture that looked handmade but sturdy, and shelves lined with books. The kitchen was spacious with a modern cast iron stove and a hand pump for water right at the sink, a luxury Tessa had not expected. Blake showed her through the house, pointing out his room, the spare bedrooms, and finally, the room that would be hers. It was larger than the one she had rented at Mrs. Patterson's, with a real bed covered in a quilt that looked store-bought, a wardrobe, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the front of the property. It was simple but clean and comfortable, and Tessa felt tears threatening again. "This is too much," she whispered. Blake set her trunks down by the wardrobe. "It is a room, you will be working hard enough to earn it." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I imagine you are hungry. There is not much prepared, but I can put together some bread and cheese and cold meat if that suits you." "That sounds wonderful, thank you." Tessa realized she had not eaten since early morning, too nervous about the auction to keep anything down. They ate together at the sturdy kitchen table, and Blake explained what her responsibilities would entail: cooking, cleaning, laundry, and maintaining the household supplies. He would pay her wages in addition to room and board, the same rate he paid the ranch hands, which shocked her because it was more than generous. "You are paying me the same as men who do physical labor all day," she protested. "Running a household is physical labor," Blake countered. "And if you are doing the work, you deserve fair compensation. Besides, I am an awful cook, and the house has been slowly falling into chaos since I have been managing it myself. You will earn every penny, I assure you." After they ate, Blake showed her where supplies were kept and told her to make herself at home. He excused himself to check on the horses, leaving Tessa alone in the quiet house. She wandered back to her room and sat on the bed, testing its softness. The events of the day crashed over her all at once, and she buried her face in her hands, letting herself cry for the first time without an audience. She cried for her father, for the loss of the only home she had ever known, for the humiliation of standing on that platform. But she also cried with relief, with gratitude, with the strange and overwhelming feeling of being saved by someone who asked nothing in return. Blake Thornton was unlike any man she had ever met, and she did not quite know what to make of him yet. The next morning, Tessa woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of roosters crowing. For a moment, she forgot where she was, then memory rushed back. She dressed quickly in one of her simple work dresses and made her way to the kitchen, determined to prove her worth. Blake was already up, standing by the stove with a coffee pot, looking somewhat helpless. When he saw her, relief crossed his face. "I was going to attempt breakfast, but honestly, I am better with horses than with frying pans." Tessa smiled, feeling more at ease than she had the night before. "Let me. You have done more than enough." She took over the kitchen, finding eggs from the henhouse just outside, bacon in the cold storage, and flour for biscuits. Within an hour, she had prepared a breakfast that was simple but hearty. Blake ate with obvious appreciation, and she felt a small glow of pride. "This is the best meal I have had in this house since I built it," he said honestly. "You may have undersold your cooking skills." "My mother taught me," Tessa said. She believed that feeding people was an act of love and that every meal should be prepared with care. Blake nodded slowly. "Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." She was. Tessa felt the familiar ache of loss but pushed through it. "She died when I was 15. Fever took her in less than a week. My father never really recovered from losing her." "I am sorry," Blake said, and the simple sincerity in his voice meant more than elaborate condolences would have. They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Tessa managed the house with an efficiency that impressed Blake, and he quickly realized that hiring her was the best decision he had made in a long time. She cooked meals that the ranch hands soon began making excuses to be around for, kept the house cleaner than it had ever been, and somehow made the Stark rooms feel warmer and more welcoming with small touches like wildflowers in jars and curtains she sewed from fabric she found in the storage room. Blake, for his part, proved to be a fair and considerate employer. He never raised his voice, always asked rather than demanded, and treated Tessa with a respect that she had not always experienced even before her circumstances had turned dire. He worked alongside his ranch hands from dawn until dusk, coming in dusty and exhausted, but always finding a smile for her when she served dinner. Tessa found herself watching him more than she should. The way he moved with unconscious grace despite his size, the way he laughed at something one of the ranch hands said, the gentle way he handled the horses. He was patient and kind but not soft. She had seen him break up a fight between two of the hands with a firmness that left no room for argument. Yet he had listened to both sides fairly before making his judgment. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Tessa was washing dishes when Blake came in earlier than usual. She turned, surprised, and found him looking somewhat uncomfortable. "Is something wrong?" she asked, concerned. "No, nothing wrong. I just wanted to talk to you about something." Blake removed his hat and set it on the table. "There is a dance in Taylor this Saturday. The town puts one on every few months. I was thinking maybe you would like to go, get out of the ranch for an evening, see some people." Tessa felt her heart skip. "I am not sure I would be welcome in Taylor after what happened." "Then they are fools," Blake said firmly, "but that is your choice. I just thought you might enjoy it. I would take you, of course, and bring you back. You would not have to worry about anything." The idea of going to a dance with Blake made Tessa's stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with nervousness about facing the town. She realized with a start that somewhere over the past weeks, her gratitude and respect for this man had begun transforming into something deeper. "I would like that," she said softly. "Thank you for thinking of me." Blake's face relaxed into a smile. "Good. It is settled then." Saturday came quickly. Tessa spent more time than she wanted to admit choosing what to wear, finally settling on her best dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. It was not fancy, but it was clean and well-fitted, and when she emerged from her room, Blake's expression made her feel like she was wearing silk and jewels. "You look beautiful," he said, then seemed embarrassed by his own boldness. "I mean, you look very nice. Ready to go." Tessa felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." Blake had cleaned up and was wearing a pressed shirt, a leather vest, and dark pants with boots that were clearly his best pair. His hair was still damp from washing, and he smelled faintly of soap and leather. Tessa had to remind herself to breathe normally. The ride to Taylor was pleasant in the cooling evening air. Blake had hitched up a wagon, and they sat side by side on the bench seat, close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed. They talked about small things, the ranch, the upcoming cattle drive Blake was planning, the book Tessa was reading from his extensive collection. When they arrived in Taylor, the town square had been transformed. Lanterns hung from posts and trees, casting warm light over the area. A small group of musicians was setting up on a makeshift stage, and people were already gathering, dressed in their best clothes. Tessa felt herself tense as heads turned toward them, conversations pausing as people recognized her. Blake seemed to sense her discomfort because he offered his arm, and when she took it, he kept her close to his side in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. They ran into Mrs. Patterson first, who greeted Tessa with a warm hug and told her how wonderful she looked. Several other people nodded politely, and Tessa realized that perhaps Blake's dramatic actions at the auction had shifted public opinion in her favor, or at least made people wary of showing disapproval in his presence. The music started, and couples began forming on the dance area. Blake turned to Tessa with a slightly sheepish expression. "I should warn you, I am not the best dancer. I know the basics, but grace is not my strong suit." Tessa laughed, feeling some of her tension ease. "I will try not to hold it against you." He led her onto the dance floor, and when his hand settled on her waist and his other hand took hers, Tessa felt her breath catch. They began moving to the music, and Blake had been right. He was not the most skilled dancer, but he was steady and careful not to step on her feet, and somehow that made it more endearing. "Thank you for bringing me," Tessa said as they moved. I did not realize how much I needed to get away from the ranch for an evening. You work too hard, Blake replied. I see you up early and working late. You do not have to prove anything to me, Tessa. The use of her first name sent a little thrill through her. Somewhere along the way, they had dropped the formal address when it was just the two of them, but hearing it now, in this setting, felt different, more intimate. I want to prove it to myself, she admitted. I want to know that I am valuable for more than what I can be sold for. Blake's hand tightened on her waist, his expression growing intense. You were always valuable. Those circumstances did not define you. They never did. The song ended, but neither of them moved immediately. They stood there, looking at each other, and Tessa felt the air between them charge with something unspoken. Then another couple bumped into them, breaking the moment, and they laughed awkwardly and stepped apart. They spent the next few hours enjoying the dance. Tessa danced with a few other men, all of whom were polite and respectful, though she found herself comparing each one unfavorably to Blake. He danced with a few other women as well, and Tessa tried not to feel the sharp stab of jealousy when he smiled at something one of them said. As the evening wore on, Wade Carson approached them. Tessa felt Blake stiffen beside her, his hand moving to rest lightly on her back in a protective gesture. Thornton, Wade nodded curtly. Miss Grant. Carson, Blake replied, his voice neutral but cool. I wanted to apologize, Wade said, surprising them both. He looked uncomfortable, like the words were being forced out of him. What I did at the auction, trying to bid on you, Miss Grant, it was not right. I let greed and opportunity cloud my judgment. You deserve better than that. Tessa studied him, trying to determine if his words were sincere. She saw shame in his face, real shame, and decided to accept his apology with grace. Thank you, Mr. Carson. That means a lot to hear. Wade nodded, clearly relieved, then turned to Blake. And you, Thornton, what you did was decent. Made me take a hard look at myself, and I did not like what I saw. So, thank you for that too, I suppose. He tipped his hat and walked away before either of them could respond. Blake watched him go with a thoughtful expression. People can surprise you sometimes. Yes, they can, Tessa agreed, looking up at him with meaning. Sometimes in the best possible ways. The ride home was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived back at the ranch, Blake helped Tessa down from the wagon, and his hands lingered on her waist just a moment longer than necessary. I had a wonderful time tonight, Tessa said softly. Thank you for taking me. So did I, Blake replied. We should do it again sometime. I would like that. They stood there in the moonlight, and Tessa thought he might kiss her. She wanted him to, she realized with startling clarity. But Blake stepped back, always the gentleman, and bid her good night before heading to take care of the horses. Tessa went inside, her heart full of confused emotions. She was falling in love with Blake Thornton, that much was becoming undeniable. But she did not know if he felt the same way, or if his kindness was simply who he was with everyone. The thought of confessing her feelings and being wrong, of ruining the comfortable life she had built here, terrified her. The weeks following the dance brought subtle changes to their relationship. Blake found more excuses to be in the house during the day, helping her with tasks that did not really require his assistance. Tessa caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she could not quite read. They talked more, shared more about their pasts, their hopes for the future. One afternoon, Tessa was in the garden she had started behind the house, pulling weeds and checking on the vegetables she had planted. Blake came around the corner, leading one of the horses that had thrown a shoe. Need to take Ranger to the farrier in town, he called out. Want to come with me? I could use the company. Tessa stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. Let me clean up and change. Give me 10 minutes. They rode together into Taylor, talking easily about everything and nothing. The town was busy with afternoon activity, and Tessa noticed that people greeted her more warmly now, the scandal of the auction fading into the past as newer gossip took its place. While Blake took care of the horse, Tessa visited the general store to pick up supplies she needed for the house. Mrs. Hendricks, who ran the store with her husband, was friendly and talkative, catching Tessa up on all the town news. As she was paying for her purchases, Mrs. Hendricks leaned in conspiratorially. "That Blake Thornton is quite a catch, dear. Half the unmarried women in the county have tried to turn his head, but he never seemed interested in any of them. Until now, perhaps." Her eyes twinkled with knowing amusement. Tessa felt her face heat. "We are just employer and employee, Mrs. Hendricks." "Oh, of course," the older woman said, not believing a word of it. "But if that were to change, you would make a lovely couple. That is all I am saying." Tessa left the store with her purchases and her head spinning. Was it so obvious how she felt? Could everyone see what she was trying so hard to hide? Blake was waiting outside the farrier's, and when he saw her, his face lit up in a way that made her heart skip. They loaded her supplies into the wagon and started the journey home, but a few miles out of town, dark clouds that had been building on the horizon suddenly unleashed a torrential downpour. Within seconds, they were both soaked. Blake urged the horses faster, trying to outrun the storm, but it was useless. Rain came down in sheets, turning the road muddy and making visibility nearly impossible. Finally, Blake spotted an old abandoned line shack off the road and steered the wagon toward it. They ran inside, dripping and shivering despite the warm air. The shack was barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it was dry. Blake checked the structure to make sure it was sound, then turned to Tessa with an apologetic expression. "I am sorry. I should have been watching the weather more closely." "It is not your fault," Tessa assured him, wringing water from her hair. "Weather in Texas can change in moments." They were alone in the small space, standing close because there was not much room to move. Tessa became acutely aware of how her wet dress clung to her, of how Blake's wet shirt revealed the muscled contours of his chest and arms. He seemed to realize it at the same moment and quickly looked away, focusing intently on the rain outside. "Blake," Tessa said softly, making a decision in that moment that terrified and exhilarated her. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you really tear up my contract? The truth." Blake was quiet for a long moment, still not looking at her. "I told you the truth. It was wrong what they were doing. But there is more, is there not?" Tessa pressed gently. "I have seen the way you look at me sometimes. Or am I imagining it?" Blake finally turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "You are not imagining it," he said roughly. "From the moment I saw you on that platform, trying so hard to be brave, I felt something. I told myself it was just compassion, just the desire to right a wrong. But every day since you came to the ranch, it has gotten harder to pretend that is all it is." Tessa's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "What is it then?" Blake took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body despite their wet clothes. "I am falling in love with you, Tessa. Maybe I have been since that first day. I know I should not be telling you this. You work for me, you are dependent on me for your livelihood, and the last thing I want is to make you feel pressured or uncomfortable. If you want to pretend I never said this, we can do that. If you want to leave, I will help you get set up somewhere else with good references and enough money to start fresh. But I had to tell you the truth, because keeping it inside was killing me." Tessa felt tears mixing with the rainwater on her face. "You are not making me uncomfortable," she whispered. "You are making me happier than I have been in years. I am falling in love with you too, Blake. I have been trying not to because I was afraid of what it might mean, afraid of losing what we have, but I cannot help it." The relief and joy that washed over Blake's face was beautiful to see. He reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. "Can I kiss you, please?" Tessa breathed. When his lips met hers, it was gentle and sweet and perfect. Tessa's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart racing as fast as her own. The kiss deepened, becoming more passionate but never losing its tenderness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Blake rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for so long," he murmured. "So have I," Tessa admitted, laughing breathlessly. They stood there, holding each other, listening to the rain pound on the roof, and Tessa felt like everything in her life had been leading to this moment. All the loss, all the pain, all the fear, had brought her here to this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. The storm eventually passed, and they made their way home in the clear evening air, sitting pressed close together on the wagon seat, fingers intertwined. When they arrived at the ranch, Blake walked Tessa to the door and kissed her again, slowly and thoroughly, before reluctantly pulling away. "I should take care of the horses," he said, though he made no move to leave. "And I should get out of these wet clothes," Tessa replied, equally reluctant to end the moment. "Tessa," Blake said seriously, "I want you to know that my feelings do not change our arrangement. You still have your job, your salary, your room for as long as you want them, regardless of what happens between us personally. I never want you to feel trapped or obligated." Tessa rose on her toes and kissed him softly. "I know. That is one of the many reasons I love you." The words hung in the air between them, the first time either had said it so plainly. Blake's eyes widened, then he smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his face. "I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes." "Me too," Tessa whispered. "Me too." Their courtship after that was the talk of Taylor, though most people seemed genuinely happy about it. Blake courted her properly, despite the fact that they lived in the same house. He brought her flowers from the fields, took her on picnics, and continued to take her to every town dance and social event. He was attentive and romantic in ways that surprised her, given his usually reserved nature. The ranch hands teased Blake mercilessly about being lovesick, but it was all good-natured, and they clearly approved of Tessa. She had won them over completely with her cooking and her genuine interest in their lives and work. 3 months after that kiss in the line shack, Blake asked Tessa to go for a ride one Sunday afternoon. They rode out to a spot on his property that overlooked a small lake, the water reflecting the blue sky and scattered clouds. Blake helped her down from her horse and led her to a flat rock that made a perfect natural seat. "I used to come here when I first bought the land," he said, sitting beside her. "Whenever things got hard or I felt like giving up, I would ride out here and remind myself what I was working for. Peace, security, a place of my own." "It is beautiful," Tessa said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "It was enough for a long time," Blake continued. "But then you came into my life and suddenly this place felt empty without you in it. Not just in my house, but in my life, my future, my everything." He shifted, pulling something from his pocket, and Tessa's heart started racing as he opened a small box to reveal a simple gold band with a small but beautiful diamond. "Tessa Grant, I know we have not been courting long by traditional standards, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. You make me want to be better, to build something lasting, to create a family and a legacy. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my everything?" Tears streamed down Tessa's face as she nodded emphatically. "Yes, Yes, of course I will marry you. I love you so much, Blake. He slipped the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and the world narrowed down to just the two of them and the promise of a future together. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Taylor. Mrs. Patterson helped Tessa make a simple but lovely white dress, and Blake wore a new suit that made him look devastatingly handsome. The church was full of people from town and neighboring ranches, all wanting to witness the marriage of the man who had made such a dramatic gesture and the woman he had saved. The ceremony was short but meaningful. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Blake kissed her, Tessa felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They had a reception in the town hall with food, music, and dancing. Even Wade Carson attended, offering his congratulations with what seemed like genuine good wishes. That night, Blake carried Tessa over the threshold of their home, now truly theirs together, and up the stairs to his room, which was now their room. He set her down gently and looked at her with such love and desire that Tessa felt beautiful and cherished and wanted in a way she never had before. "I love you, Mrs. Thornton," he said softly, beginning to work on the buttons of her dress. "I love you too, Mr. Thornton," she replied, reaching up to pull him down for a kiss that promised everything. Their first year of marriage was blissful despite the hard work that running a ranch required. Tessa discovered that being a rancher's wife was very different from being an employee. She was now a partner in every sense, helping make decisions about the ranch, managing the books, and playing hostess when buyers or neighbors came to visit. Blake was an attentive and loving husband. He never took her for granted, still brought her flowers for no reason, and never let a day go by without telling her he loved her. They worked hard during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, building not just a marriage but a true partnership. About 8 months after their wedding, Tessa began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Blake, wanting to be sure. When she finally told him over dinner one evening, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her up in his arms, careful despite his excitement, and spun her around with a whoop of joy that brought the ranch hands running to see what was wrong, only to find their boss grinning like a fool. "We are having a baby," Blake told them proudly, and the men congratulated them with hearty backslaps and teasing about Blake finally having someone who might actually listen to him. Blake became even more protective during Tessa's pregnancy, often to her amused exasperation. He did not want her to lift anything heavy, work too hard, or do anything that might be remotely dangerous. Tessa had to remind him repeatedly that pregnancy was not an illness and that she was perfectly capable of running the household. "I know," Blake would say, pulling her into his arms. "But you are carrying the most precious thing in the world to me, and I just want to make sure you are both safe." How could she argue with that? Their son was born on a warm spring morning in 1880 after a long but relatively uncomplicated labor. Blake refused to leave Tessa's side, holding her hand and offering words of encouragement even when she squeezed his hand hard enough to hurt. When the baby finally arrived, healthy and howling, Blake cut the cord with shaking hands and cradled his son with a look of wonder. "He is perfect," Blake whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Tessa, he is absolutely perfect." They named him James after Tessa's father, and Tessa cried when Blake suggested it, touched that he would honor her father's memory that way. Little James had his father's dark hair and his mother's eyes, and he quickly became the center of their universe. Blake proved to be a devoted father, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with James during the night so Tessa could rest, and talking to his son about the ranch and the horses and everything under the sun. Watching him with their baby made Tessa fall even more in love with her husband, if that was possible. The years that followed were full and happy. The ranch prospered under Blake's careful management and Tessa's organizational skills. They added more land, increased their herds, and became one of the more successful operations in the area. But Blake never lost sight of what was truly important, always making time for Tessa and James, always putting family first. When James was 3, Tessa discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah after Blake's mother. If Blake had been protective during her first pregnancy, he was impossible during her second. And Tessa finally had to put her foot down and remind him that she had done this before and knew what she was doing. Sarah was a beautiful baby with blonde curls and blue eyes, and she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. Blake would spend hours with her in his arms, telling her stories and singing her songs in his deep, slightly off-key voice. James proved to be a wonderful big brother, gentle and protective of his little sister. Watching their children play together in the house that Blake had built, Tessa often found herself overwhelmed with gratitude for how her life had turned out. One evening when James was 5 and Sarah was 2, Tessa stood on the porch watching Blake teach James to rope a fence post. Sarah was playing with her doll nearby, chattering away in her own language. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and everything felt perfect. Blake looked up and caught her watching. He smiled and walked over, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "How different my life is now from what I thought it would be," Tessa replied honestly. 5 years ago, I stood on a platform thinking my life was over, and then you appeared and gave me a new beginning." "You gave me a new beginning too," Blake said, turning her in his arms to face him. "I was building all of this, but I did not know what I was building it for. You gave me purpose, gave me a family, gave me a reason for everything I do. You saved me just as much as I saved you, Tessa." She reached up to cup his face, this man who had changed her entire world. "I love you so much. Every single day I wake up grateful that you walked into my life." "I love you too," Blake murmured, kissing her softly. "Always and forever." James came running over, demanding his father's attention for some important 5-year-old matter, and Sarah toddled after him, not wanting to be left out. Blake scooped up both children, one in each arm, and Tessa's heart swelled at the sight of her family, whole and happy in hers. As the years continued to pass, the Thornton Ranch became known throughout the region not just for its quality cattle and horses, but for the family that ran it. Blake and Tessa became respected members of the community, known for their fair dealings and their willingness to help neighbors in need. Blake never forgot how close Tessa had come to losing everything, and he made it a point to help others facing similar situations when he could, always quietly and without seeking recognition. James grew into a strong, intelligent boy who shared his father's love of ranching and his mother's quick mind. By the time he was 10, he could rope and ride with the best of the ranch hands and was already showing a natural talent for understanding cattle and horses. But he was also gentle and thoughtful, traits he had learned from watching his parents' relationship. Sarah grew into a spirited girl with a stubborn streak a mile wide and a heart just as big. She adored both her parents but had a special bond with her father, who could deny her nothing. She wanted to do everything her big brother did, much to James's mixed feelings, and by the age of 7, she could ride almost as well as he could. When James was 12 and Sarah was 9, Tessa gave birth to twins, a boy and girl they named Daniel and Emma. The house became even more chaotic and full of life, and Blake expanded it again to accommodate their growing family. He joked that at this rate, they would need to build a second house, but his eyes shone with pride and love every time he looked at his children. The older children were wonderful with the babies, James taking his role as oldest seriously, and Sarah appointing herself as the twins' personal guardian. Watching all four of her children together, Tessa sometimes had to pinch herself to believe this was real, that this full, beautiful, messy, perfect life was truly hers. One day, when the twins were about a year old, Blake came in from working in the far pastures earlier than usual. He found Tessa in the kitchen, preparing dinner while Emma played on a blanket nearby and Daniel napped in a basket. Without saying a word, Blake pulled Tessa into his arms and held her tightly. "Is everything all right?" Tessa asked, concerned by his sudden intensity. "Everything is more than all right," Blake said into her hair. "I was out there working, and I just suddenly felt overwhelmed by how blessed I am. I have you, I have our children, I have this land, and I have built a life that means something. I wanted to come home and tell you that none of it would mean anything without you." Tessa pulled back to look at him, seeing the emotion shining in his eyes. "We built this together, Blake. This life, this family, this ranch. It is ours, not yours or mine, but ours." "I know," Blake said, cupping her face. "But you are the foundation of it all. You are the heart of this family, the heart of this home, the heart of me. I just needed you to know that." Tessa kissed him softly, deeply, putting all her love into it. Even after years of marriage, 4 children, and countless ordinary moments, the love between them had not dimmed. If anything, it had grown stronger, deeper, more essential to who they both were. When James turned 15, he started talking about wanting to prove himself, wanting to do more than just work on the family ranch. Blake understood the need, having felt the same way at that age, so he arranged for James to work for a neighboring rancher for the summer, learning different techniques and proving he could make it on his own merits rather than just being the boss's son. It was hard for both Blake and Tessa to let him go, even though he was only a few miles away and came home every Sunday. Their firstborn was growing up, becoming a man, and it made them both acutely aware of how quickly time was passing. Sarah, now 12, took advantage of her brother's absence to prove she could handle his chores on top of her own. She worked tirelessly, determined to show her father that she was just as capable as James, and Blake was both proud and slightly overwhelmed by his daughter's fierce determination. "She gets that from you," Blake told Tessa one evening as they watched Sarah working with one of the young horses, her small frame somehow commanding the much larger animal's respect. "She gets it from both of us," Tessa corrected. "She has your stubbornness and my refusal to accept limitations." Blake laughed. "God help us when she gets old enough to start courting. I am not ready for that." "You have a few years yet," Tessa assured him, though she shared his anxiety about that inevitable day. The twins grew into distinct personalities despite being born at the same time. Daniel was quiet and thoughtful, preferring books and learning to the physical work of the ranch, though he did his share without complaint. Emma was adventurous and fearless, always getting into something and keeping everyone on their toes. As the children grew, Blake and Tessa made sure to maintain their connection as a couple, not just as parents. They still took rides together when they could, still stole moments alone, still made each other laugh and talked long into the night about everything and nothing. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Blake surprised Tessa with a trip to San Antonio, just the two of them. It was the first time they had been away from the children for more than a few hours, and while they missed their family, it was wonderful to have time to focus only on each other. They stayed in a nice hotel, ate in restaurants, and walked through the city hand in hand like young sweethearts. On their last evening, Blake took Tessa to a jewelry store and bought her a beautiful necklace, a gold chain with a pendant shaped like a heart. "You already gave me jewelry," Tessa protested, touching her wedding ring and the earrings he had given her on their 5th anniversary. "I will give you jewelry on every anniversary until we are old and gray," Blake declared, "and probably after that too. I like seeing you wear things I gave you, knowing that you are mine and I am yours." Tessa kissed him right there in the middle of the store, not caring who saw. "I am yours and you are mine, always." As they rode home, both of them eager to see their children despite having enjoyed the time away, Tessa reflected on the past 10 years. From that terrifying day on the auction platform to this moment, returning home to a house full of love and laughter, her life had transformed completely. "Thank you," she said suddenly, causing Blake to look at her with curiosity. "For what?" "For seeing me when I was at my lowest, for giving me a choice when I had none, for loving me when I felt unlovable, for building this beautiful life with me, for everything, Blake, for absolutely everything." Blake brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Thank you for saying yes, to coming to the ranch, to marrying me, to building this life with me. Thank you for these 10 incredible years and for every year to come." When they arrived home, they were mobbed by excited children, all talking at once about everything that had happened in their parents' absence. The twins had learned a new song. Sarah had successfully broken a particularly stubborn horse, and James, home for Sunday, had news about a neighboring ranch that was looking to hire hands for the fall cattle drive. That evening, after the children were finally in bed, Blake and Tessa sat on the porch watching the stars come out. Blake had his arm around Tessa and she was leaned against his chest, comfortable and content. "You ever think about that day?" Tessa asked softly. "The auction?" "Sometimes," Blake admitted. "Not with pain, but with gratitude. If it had not happened, I would not have found you. I would probably still be alone in this big house, working hard but living small, not really understanding what I was missing." "I think about it too," Tessa said. "I used to have nightmares about it, but I do not anymore. Now when I think about it, I think about how it brought me here, to you, to our children, to this life. I would not change anything, not even the hardest parts, because they all led me home." Blake tightened his arm around her. "This is home, is it not? Not just the house or the land, but us, together." "Yes," Tessa agreed, her heart full. "This is home, you are home, this family is home. I have everything I never knew I needed, and it all started with a cowboy who paid double and tore up a contract, who saw a woman who needed saving and decided to be the one to do it." "I saw a woman who was already saving herself," Blake corrected. "I just gave you the tools to do it. Everything else, you built on your own strength and courage." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts but connected by their closeness and their love. Life on the ranch was not always easy. There were droughts and hard winters, sick cattle and broken equipment, long days and endless work. But they faced it all together, and that made all the difference. As the years continued to march forward, the Thornton family became something of an institution in Taylor. Blake's success inspired other ranchers to adopt some of his methods, and Tessa's grace and kindness made her beloved in the community. Their children grew strong and capable, each finding their own path while remaining close to their family. James, when he turned 18, announced that he wanted to stay and work the ranch with his father, eventually taking it over when Blake was ready to step back. Blake could not have been prouder or more relieved, having secretly worried that his son might want to seek his fortune elsewhere. Sarah shocked everyone by declaring at 16 that she wanted to train horses professionally, not just for the ranch but as a business. Blake was hesitant at first, worried about his daughter taking on such a demanding and sometimes dangerous job. But Tessa reminded him that Sarah had inherited her parents' determination, and that trying to stop her would only make her more resolute. Sarah proved to be naturally gifted with horses, having a way of understanding them that even experienced horse breakers admired. By the time she was 18, she had people coming from neighboring counties to have her work with their difficult animals, and she was earning a reputation that went far beyond her age. The twins, as they grew, showed their distinct interests. Daniel announced he wanted to be a teacher, wanting to bring education to rural children who often had to travel great distances or go without schooling entirely. Emma wanted to be a rancher like her father and brother, already helping with the cattle and showing a knack for the business side of things. Blake and Tessa watched their children pursue their dreams with pride and a touch of melancholy for the swift passage of time. Their house, once so full of noise and chaos, began to quiet as the older children spent more time on their own pursuits. But the love that filled every room never diminished, and when the family gathered for Sunday dinners, it was as loud and joyful as ever. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Blake and Tessa's children conspired to throw them a surprise party. They invited people from all over the county, and the turnout was tremendous. It seemed everyone wanted to celebrate the couple who had become symbols of love, perseverance, and success. Wade Carson attended, now an old man who had never married but had become a much kinder person over the years. He approached Blake and Tessa with a somewhat embarrassed smile. "I have been meaning to tell you both," he said. "Watching your marriage over the years, seeing how you built your family and your life together, it changed me, made me realize what really matters. I may not have found what you two have, but knowing it exists, seeing it firsthand, that has been a gift. So thank you." Tessa hugged him warmly, and Blake shook his hand with genuine respect. It was a moment of grace and forgiveness that summed up who they were as people. Mrs. Patterson, now elderly and retired from running the boarding house, sat in a place of honor at the celebration. She held Tessa's hands and told her how proud she was of the woman she had become, how happy she was to have witnessed her journey from frightened girl to confident woman, wife, and mother. As the evening wore on, and the party showed no signs of slowing, Blake pulled Tessa away from the crowd and led her to the spot overlooking the lake where he had proposed 20 years earlier. The moon was full, reflecting off the water in a silvery path, and the sounds of the celebration were distant and dreamlike. Blake took both of Tessa's hands in his and looked at her with the same intensity he had shown all those years ago. 20 years, he said softly. 20 years since you agreed to be my wife. It seems like both a lifetime and no time at all. I know what you mean, Tessa replied, her eyes shining with tears. Sometimes I still feel like that frightened girl you saved, and sometimes I feel ancient and wise. But always, always, I feel loved. You are loved, Blake assured her. More every day, more every year. I did not think it was possible to love you more than I did on our wedding day, but I was wrong. Every challenge we have faced together, every joy we have shared, every moment of our lives has deepened my love for you. And mine for you, Tessa whispered. You gave me more than a home or a family, Blake. You gave me myself. You saw me when I could not see myself, believed in me when I had stopped believing, and loved me when I felt unworthy of love. You gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams. Blake pulled her close, and they stood there for a long time, just holding each other and listening to the sounds of the night. In the distance, they could hear their children's laughter, and the sound filled them both with deep contentment. "Shall we go back?" Blake finally asked. "Our family will wonder where we disappeared to." "Our family," Tessa repeated, savoring the words. Yes, let's go back. After all, that is where we belong. They walked hand in hand back to the celebration, to the life they had built together from nothing but determination, love, and faith in each other. The path had not always been easy, but it had always been worth it. As they rejoined the party, surrounded by their children, their friends, and the community they were part of, Tessa caught Blake's eye and smiled. He smiled back, and in that exchange was everything they needed to say. Love, gratitude, joy, and the promise of many more years to come. The years that followed their 20th anniversary brought changes, as years always do. James married a neighboring rancher's daughter, a sensible young woman named Catherine who proved to be a perfect match for him. They built a house on the edge of the property and welcomed Blake and Tessa's first grandchild, a boy they named Blake after his grandfather. Blake Thornton Sr. wept openly when he held his first grandchild, and Tessa teased him gently about going soft in his old age. But she cried too, overwhelmed by the continuation of their legacy, by the knowledge that the love they had built was expanding into new generations. Sarah married a horse trader who appreciated her skills and supported her ambitions, and they had twin girls who were already showing their mother's way with animals by the time they could walk. Daniel became a teacher as he had dreamed, establishing a small school on the ranch property that served children from several neighboring spreads. Emma stayed unmarried longer, focused on learning every aspect of the ranching business before finally falling in love with one of the ranch hands, a good man who treated her as an equal partner. As Blake and Tessa entered their 50s, they gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, trusting James and Emma to handle most of the work. Blake still consulted on major decisions, and Tessa still managed the books and the household, but they had more time to enjoy each other and their growing number of grandchildren. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching yet another Texas sunset, Blake turned to Tessa with a serious expression. "I have been thinking," he said. "That is always dangerous," Tessa teased, but she took his hand, sensing he had something important to say. "When we are gone, this ranch will be divided among our children as it should be. But I want to establish something permanent, something that will help others the way I tried to help you. I was thinking about creating a fund, managed by the bank in Taylor, that would help families in desperate financial situations. Not a loan, but a grant, so that no one else ever has to stand on an auction block like you did." Tessa felt her eyes fill with tears. "Blake, that is beautiful. And so like you to think of others even as you are planning for our family's future." "Will you help me set it up?" Blake asked. "You are better with words than I am, and you understand what it feels like to be on the receiving end. Together, we can create something that will outlast us." "Of course I will help you," Tessa agreed. "Together, we can do anything." They spent the next several months working with lawyers and the bank to establish what they called simply the Thornton Family Grant. It was funded with a substantial portion of their savings, enough to help dozens of families over the years. The only requirement was that recipients demonstrate genuine need and have a plan for how the money would help them become self-sufficient. The first family to receive a grant was a young widow with 3 children who was about to lose her small farm. The gratitude in her eyes reminded both Blake and Tessa of why they had started the fund in the first place. Over the years, they helped many families, and the ripple effects of their generosity spread throughout the county. As Blake and Tessa entered their 60s, their health remained relatively good, though they moved a bit slower and tired a bit easier. Their children were all well established, their grandchildren were growing strong and smart, and their legacy was secure. They had achieved something rare and precious, a long, happy, love-filled life together, On the morning of their 40th wedding anniversary, Tessa woke to find Blake already awake, watching her with a soft smile. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, his voice rougher with age but still warm with love. "Good morning, handsome," Tessa replied, reaching up to touch his face, now lined with wrinkles that she found just as attractive as his younger face had been. 40 years. Can you believe it? Some days, no, Blake admitted. Other days, it feels like we have been together forever, like there was never a time when you were not part of my life. They rose and dressed, knowing that their children had planned another celebration despite their protests that they were too old for such fuss. As predicted, when they emerged from their room, the house was already full of family, children and grandchildren preparing a festive breakfast and decorating with flowers and ribbons. Little Blake, now a strapping young man of 19, gave a speech that he had clearly prepared, talking about what his grandparents' marriage had taught him about love, commitment, and partnership. He spoke about how watching them over the years had shaped his own understanding of what a good marriage should look like, and he hoped to find the same kind of love they had when his time came. The speech left both Blake and Tessa in tears, proud and humbled by the impact their love had on future generations. After the breakfast and the gifts, and the endless stream of well wishes from friends and neighbors who stopped by, Blake and Tessa finally found a quiet moment alone on their porch. "We did well, did we not?" Blake asked, gesturing to encompass everything, the ranch, the family, the life they had built. "We did better than well," Tessa replied, leaning against him in the way that had become second nature over 40 years. "We created something beautiful from what could have been a tragedy. We turned pain into joy, loss into gain, and fear into love. I love you, Tessa Thornton," Blake said firmly, the same way he had said it countless times over the decades. "I loved you then, I love you now, and I will love you for whatever time we have left." "And I love you, Blake Thornton," Tessa replied with equal firmness. "You saved my life and then gave me a reason to live it. You gave me everything I never knew I needed. Thank you for being exactly who you are, for loving me exactly as I am, and for building this incredible life with me." As the sun set on their 40th anniversary, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple, Blake and Tessa remained on the porch, holding hands and watching the day fade into night. Around them, they could hear the sounds of their family, their children and grandchildren laughing and talking, the continuation of everything they had started all those years ago in Taylor, Texas, when a cowboy paid double and tore up a contract, giving a frightened young woman not just her freedom, but her future. Their love story, born from an act of compassion and grown through years of dedication, had become something larger than either of them alone. It had created a family, influenced a community, and left a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. But in that moment, none of that mattered as much as the simple fact that they were together, still in love, still grateful for the gift of each other, and still facing whatever came next hand in hand, heart to heart, forever and always.